Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. Researchers have indicated for some time that sleep deprivation is an independent risk factor for heart disease, for atherosclerosis, that type of hardening of the arteries, which leads to heart disease. So that's been known for a long time. Sleep deprivation definitely contributes to heart disease, but what we've never really known is what exactly is the mechanism for this. Why does this happen? And so some researchers out of Massachusetts General Hospital had the same question, and they sought to evaluate how sleep deprivation causes hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis. And so they had what they did is they caused sleep deprivation is an animal study, and these animals were genetically programmed to develop heart disease. And so they basically separated the subjects into two groups. One group had normal sleep process, and the other group, their sleep was regularly interrupted. So basically they induced sleep deprivation in this animal model. And what they found out is that they definitely had an increased accumulation of hardening of their arteries, of atherosclerosis. And the way that this is detected is that they find kind of a layer of inflammation, inflammatory substances building up in the blood vessels of the animals that were sleep deprived. And the reason why the animal study, why they did the animal study, because you can't get human subjects to have their arteries and veins like dissected for analysis, but you can do this in an animal study. And so here's what they found out is the more sleep deprived that these animals were, the greater the amount of these inflammatory substances that were built up in the blood vessels. And this inflammation of this accumulation of inflammation in the blood vessels is a direct correlation to atherosclerosis and heart disease. But they sought to dig a little bit deeper and go, well, how is that? Why did sleep deprivation cause more inflammation to build up in the blood vessels? Because when they compared that to the animal model or the control group that were not sleep deprived, they didn't have this inflammatory substances build up in their blood vessels. And so what they did was they dug a little deeper, and what they found out is that there's a hormone that's produced by the brain, the part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and it produces lots of different hormones, but it produces this one hormone called hypocretin. Another name for it is called orexin. And hypocretin has mostly been known as a neuropeptide, a hormone that modulates and kind of influences wakefulness and appetite. And what they found out in the sleep deprived subject group, that they had a significant decrease in hypocretin. And as the hypocretin hormone went down, there was a relative increase in these inflammatory substances. So in other words, they discovered, and I think they were the first group to discover this, that this hormone, hypocretin, produced by the hypothalamus, modulates inflammation in the blood vessels. So this was a new discovery. And so this is at least one mechanism as to how sleep deprivation influences heart disease. And it's because of this hypocretin hormone dropping down, which causes an increase in inflammation. So in other words, hypocretin usually modulates inflammation. In other words, if hypocretin is elevated, then inflammation goes down. But in the case of sleep deprivation, if hypocretin hormone is down, that causes a rise. In fact, they found that it was a twofold, over twice the amount of inflammatory substances deposited into these blood vessels in the subject that were sleep deprived and had the lower amount of hypocretin. And so there's a direct correlation to sleep deprivation causes hypocretin to go down, which leads to these inflammatory substances going up. They then embed themselves in the blood vessels, and that's a direct correlation with atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. So this is at least one mechanism that we didn't know before that leads to heart disease. Having sleep deprivation is something so simple, but it's so simple. However, if I'm doing a history on a new patient and they have a whole list of symptoms, if sleep deprivation, or let's say insomnia or sleep issues, is part of their list, in my book that goes right to the top of the list, because if somebody can't get proper sleep, there's very little else I can do for them before we get their sleep really under control. So sleep has always been a priority for me, but this is a really new understanding and kind of adds more understanding of why that should be such a priority. And so sleep is super key. This was a study that was done out of a prestigious group out of the Massachusetts General Hospital, and it was published just this month in a well-known medical journal called Nature. So hopefully that was helpful information. Be sure to prioritize the quality and length of your sleep. We just can't overemphasize it enough. And now we know that there's a direct correlation with sleep deprivation and hardening of the arteries. So if you improve your sleep, you can improve the health of your heart. How cool is that? So hopefully that's helpful information. I will keep reading the studies and bring you the information. Until then, keep it real.